So good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you're at. And welcome to today's webinar on the topic of effective risk communication for return to work, guidelines for effective messaging for businesses and organizations. My name is Victoria Granger, and I am with Wellness Works Canada, your nonprofit workplace health and performance association. So we just support employers and workplace wellness or workplace health and performance practitioners in building healthy, high-performing work cultures. So what we do is we provide evidence-informed, cost-effective resources, tools, education, connection, and certification. And we specialize in bridging the gap between employee well-being and organizational performance. So I just have one announcement before we get started. It is Healthy Workplace Month for those of you, for a lot of you probably are aware. And so for Healthy Workplace Month, we're offering a lot of different webinars and workshops and things for people. And we also have we're offering 20% off of our memberships and 15% off of our mental health first aid kits. So if you're curious about what we do for our memberships, just for our employers, what we do is we support workplaces with an unbiased assessment of current state, and which includes a bit of an audit and a survey, and you get segmented results, tailored recommendations, and a strategy session, and an employer of choice certification based on where you are at. And so all of this is just working towards our aim of our vision of building a healthier, higher performing Canadian population and economy, one organization at a time together. So without further ado, I'm really excited to have Dr. Thomas Barker, Tom, here with us today. So we'll just move along. I'd like to just go over his bio. He has a lot of expertise in the industry. So he's right now a professor of communication in the graduate program in communication and technology in the Faculty of Arts, Digital and Media Studies unit at the University of Alberta. He's the project lead for the Healthy Workplaces for Helping Professionals project, which is a project that's close to my heart. We've been, involved with it a little bit, and through that, actually, there are also partners of Wellness Works Canada offering some really great evidence-informed information out to folks here in Alberta. So he's the project, the Healthy Workplaces for Helping Professions project, was originally funded by the OHS Futures program at the Alberta Ministry of Labour. So he's been engaged with the Alberta nonprofit human services sector since 2014, and his research work focuses on communication issues in public health, risk communication, and community engagement. So really thrilled to have Tom here to talk with us and bring all of your expertise to obviously beyond Alberta, because we do have a national audience. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it along to you, Tom, to talk about this really timely topic of effective risk communication for returning to work.
There we are. There's my picture. Thank you so much, Victoria, and thank you so much for the opportunity to present today. Just a little bit before another preliminary, before we move on, a little bit about me. Sometimes people like to know where you're from and what land you identify with, and there's a little picture of it on there. University of Alberta respectfully acknowledges we're situated on unceded lands known as Treaty 6 territory, traditional homelands of diverse and cultures influence our community. And many of today's participants may not be living in Treaty 6 territory, but I invite you all to reflect on your situatedness in the lands of traditional peoples. Thank you so much. So to move ahead then, today's presentation, a little bit of a pep talk at the beginning. We're going to look at what effective risk communication is, and then we're going to look at what role it plays in bringing people back to work. In this pandemic, the return to work is not just one event. Return to work can be returning to work after the second wave or possibly third wave. It could be introducing new people to the workplace, opening up and it doesn't necessarily have to be in a business organization, schools, and as our example will show for school, what risk it is, and what role it plays in returning to work, and how it helps orient people to the workplace. And we're going to look at an example of an effective return to work risk communication that exemplifies some of the principles that we're going to be looking at today. And we're going to look at then at how to proceed, and what you want to do if you want to have what we call strategic risk communication in your environment. And then a little takeaway that I think I hope people will appreciate, and that's the risk communication golden rule, which is a very useful principle and tip to work on. So to get started then, let's look at our definition of risk communication. Refers to the messages that employees and clients receive from their immediate supervisors and company representatives that assist them in making safe decisions when confronted by hazardous situations. I didn't mean to skip ahead there. If I touch my screen, here we go. Oh, let's just see. All right. Sorry, there we go. The focus is on messaging and the design of those messages. And as we will see, we look at how effective messaging is built on an understanding of the what's called the expertise in the communication and in whatever risk situation a company faces. And then another important point here is that immediate supervisors and company representatives, they're the folks that employees look to in order to understand how they're supposed to behave and how they're supposed to act and what they're supposed to do, especially in a situation where they have to distance themselves, where they have to wear masks, where they have to identify how large a cohort is and that sort of stuff. So they have to make those decisions on the job. And so the good risk communication supplies that kind of background and that kind of framing of in their messages in order for people to be able to do that. So let's look at an example of a couple of risk communication messages here. First, this one, the rule. Another one, wearing your mask when working at the cash register protects you from surface-borne infection. So what are the differences between those two messages? One of the differences is their approach. One of them is more or less a rule that employees have to follow. The other one is more like is more like an engaging message that invites a conversation, what we call a two-way conversation. And so when you're thinking about your messaging for your employees, you want to see it not as I'm passing along the expertise of the Minister of Health, but that I'm looking at what is important for our workplace and for our employees and for our clients. And acknowledging that the employees themselves are going to have some idea of what is a safe way to use protective equipment, what is a safe way to manage what's called fomite transmission, which is picking up the virus from coins or from surfaces. So effective risk communication isn't just simple telling of the employees what to do, but it's engaging them in a conversation. And when we talk about the wellness of employees in the workplace, we're often talking about how much those employees are engaged as agents in the workplace, so that they have a say in what and how policies are enacted. And they will eventually have that say anyway, because we depend on our employees to make their own decisions. And in terms of risk, we want them to understand the decisions we want them to make. It's also not necessarily negative. You can look at these two messages up here and decide which one is the more negative. If you break this rule, there will be consequences. But the way occupational health and safety is moving today, the emphasis is more on the rewarding of safe behaviors. And so employees can understand what is a safe behavior if they have the right expertise and they know what the goals of the organization are. And so the emphasis is not so much on saying, well, you need to do this or else, but on equipping them with the information they need in order to make the right kinds of risk decisions. And finally, it's something that's not made up on the spot. The situation you don't want to get into is where you're at the cash register and you're making you're kind of watching how your employees are doing things, and at that point you don't want to say, wait a second, nah, this isn't going to work, let's do something else. You want to have it, you want it to be planned. You want it to be organized in such a way that that the decisions that employees make aren't made just because you and them at that point decided to make that decision. And so strategic is the word that we use for that. So let's take a look at what strategic communication actually looks like. I think I need to. All right. I'm going to share another screen now, and this is an example of a successful return to work case. This is at Colgate University, and I want you to watch this. And as you do, look for this in the video, how the employees and the staff at this university are working together, and how it's a matter of engagement. So there are benefits to employees following the risk messaging from their employers, and those need to be balanced with the costs of this return to work situation. And how the messages, resources, tasks, and time are strategically planned ahead of time, and then also how the situation is monitored and ongoing. So at this point, I'm going to move over here and share another screen. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to share. Let's see. I'm going to share this screen for you. And it's a video clip that lasts about 6 or 7 minutes, just to watch the whole thing. And I'll explain a little bit more about this situation, which I know pretty well because one of my students this summer in a risk communication course is the communication director at Colgate University. So let's watch this clip.
Open for in-person classes or stick with remote learning? That's the difficult choice colleges are facing as the fall semester begins. A number of prominent colleges and universities have already welcomed students back for classes, only to reverse course because of COVID-19 outbreaks. Colgate University in North Central New York has managed to open its campus and keep it open so far after some careful planning. Errol Barnett went back to school to see how the university is trying to stay safe and stay in session.
You're not coming back to normal. You're coming back to a new normal.
That's Brian Casey's message to the returning 2,500 students at Colgate University in upstate New York.
We are outside Lawrence Hall.
To bring them back, the president of the 2-century-old school has an unprecedented plan.
So you enter, you have to come immediately to the right, where a machine will instantly take your temperature.
And this camera is using infrared technology to detect.
So every classroom now shows you the physical distancing patterns, and then you can see that all the chairs have been pulled 6 feet apart.
So only 9 students at a time.
In a room that probably would have had 20 to 22.
Wow.
So this is a small lecture hall where you can see that the seats have been blocked off. But more importantly, you see a camera off to our right that as the professor moves, the monitor, the camera and the monitor move with him. So for those who are watching from home remotely, they're getting the whole classroom experience. And
Casey decided against all remote learning and instead structured a reopening plan with advice from medical and scientific experts. The key, a mandatory 2-week on-campus quarantine as step one. All learning is initially virtual. Meals delivered straight to students' dorms and time spent outside scheduled. Colgate's faculty and staff are also undergoing routine testing.
Why do you think this might be the safest approach?
all of our students will have been tested before they show up, upon arrival, and during the quarantine toward the end. So we will know at the end of those 14 days that any student coming out will have had 3 negative tests within a normal period in which the disease exhibits itself.
It's a secluded community.
Alex didn't have a chance to return home to Vietnam when COVID-19 closed the school in the spring. The international student has been living on campus ever since and supports the quarantine.
What do you say to other students who are fearful in coming back to campus?
I think the fear is totally valid. I myself am very nervous about everyone coming back.
How risky do you feel it is for you to be on campus?
I actually think it's less risky for me to be on campus rather than returning home.
Mariana Lemon is willing to make sacrifices for the on-campus experience. The freshman from the Bronx moved in over the summer.
I still want to have a freshman year and I'm still here and I'm honestly willing to always be in my room and just take classes online from my room and only talk to my roommate and maybe have the social distance lunches or dinners kind of deals outside when it's still warm out. So I'm willing to have a alternate freshman year if that's what it takes.
The students we spoke with admit the lack of socializing will be difficult.
When you're apart, feeling that kind of connection that you would have when you're here.
Especially for a linebacker on the school's football team. AJ DeSantis says team building is the point.
That's one of the most important things in football because it's not one guy in the field at a time. It's many guys on the field, guys working together, special teams, offense, defense, everything together.
If there's one thing we've seen nationwide, from Georgia Tech to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and USC, it's that college students will still socialize in large groups despite the risk, leading those campuses to either shut down or quarantine infected students. Casey has a plan for that too.
We're doing wastewater testing. The virus exhibits itself in wastewater often before you see it in your mucus or your blood.
Really?
Yes. So we have put readers, wastewater walls, all of the houses on Broad Street where a lot of our students live. So if we detect any increase in the virus, which you'll see first in wastewater, we will immediately test everyone in that particular house.
How much is it costing you to do this?
Millions of dollars. We purchased a hotel, so we have a quarantine site.
Millions in the singular, or are we approaching $10 million?
We are below 10 million. 3 rounds of testing, rapid testing machines. All of our dining halls had to be completely retrofitted to have grab and go, extra staff to do the testing. You know, we're north of $4 million right now. That's a lot of money just out of pocket.
So you want this to work?
I want this to work.
So much so, President Casey is currently living in a dorm room himself, neighboring his students for 17 days.
If I'm asking you to do this, I'll do it too. So whatever food you're eating, I'm going to eat. Whatever rules you have about when you're allowed outside, that's when I'll go outside. So I'm doing it with them.
No special treatment? Are we supposed to believe that from the college president?
The fact that I have a single with no bathroom strikes people as a real plus.
And the president's RA, Alex.
He'll be staying in my floor in my building, so it's a lucky coincidence.
Are you going to lay down the law if you
Yes.
see the president break the rules?
Yes, I am not afraid to have that conversation.
Okay. We will be following up.
Okay.
Casey acknowledges the living situation he's asking students to go through isn't ideal. But in our new world, he says, it's essential.
Why is that an important point to make?
Because in our culture, we rarely talk about public good. We rarely talk about sacrificing individual needs for benefits that accrue to everybody. That's not part of our political rhetoric. It's not part of our culture anymore. So we want to tell them this is going to be hard and that they need to learn to think about not just themselves, but other people. And I think we're an educational institution. Why don't we make that something they're learning this year? Why don't we make that the lesson?
For CBS This Morning Saturday, Errol Barnett, Hamilton, New York.
I like this guy.
Yeah.
This guy gets it.
And he walks the walk, doesn't
And-
just talk to talk.
Right.
Look, life is about choices. And that's what these students are facing right now. If you want to be on campus, here's an option.
Yeah.
He might get it. It doesn't mean all 20-year-olds
Yeah.
always get it.
Without a doubt.
It's
Yeah.
it's tough.
We all admit it.
socializing is part of the college
Yeah.
experience.
Right.
But you know,
College experience.
as Americans, we forget freedom is oftentimes not free, and with it comes great responsibility. So,
Yeah.
kids, let's learn.
Oh, hang on. Just a moment while I get this.
Capturing it, have much less carbon because of natural gas.
I see a lot of the themes that we've talked about, I brought up already. The benefits in education and the benefits in the public good. You can see how the plan was all laid out ahead of time. So the messaging, the resources are all there, and how it's monitored and evaluated through those monitoring of buildings, and they have a dashboard as well. Jasmine Kellogg, who's the communication advisor, shared her dashboard with me. Your return to work situation may not be as elaborate nor as well funded as this return to work situation, but nevertheless the principles are the same, and effective communication has a role to play. So let's look at some of the things that you want to try to achieve through your the communication messages that you prepare for your employees and staff and clients. First, to maintain a balance of the benefits and risks. So here's what we can gain by our compliance, and here's what we have to lose by non-compliance. So you have a chance to enhance your employee engagement wellness through building relationships with your employees that work. And in fact, now I've heard from Jasmine that the students are themselves beginning to prepare messaging. They're making videos for each other to help them handle the situation at Colgate University. It ensures that expert or evidence-based safety policy and messaging is in place. And so, as we will see later in this presentation, we'll see how that expertise information is channeled into the messaging. And it demonstrates responsibility and builds trust. So the more that your messaging is strategic and reflective of both your staff and also the expertise that we get from health authorities, the more your employees are going to see that it's going to build that trust element, which is very important. So let's look then at a framework that you can use to help you guide the development of materials in this way. The one that we use, that was used at Colgate University, and the one that I'm going to kind of focus on in today's presentation, is called the Health Canada Risk Communication Framework. Now, the way Health Canada does things is that they build a framework that allows them, as a framework can do, allows them to approach any kind of opportunity or risk in an organized way. Okay, the framework that Health Canada created has three elements to it. The first are the values. Okay, what do we value in our organization? Well, we value engagement. We value people. We value ethical behaviors, or whatever kind of values they have. Then Then the second is, what are our goals? Okay, what would be the goals of an organization? We're gonna grow. We're going to develop new product areas. We're going to be leaders in the field. Those have to guide messaging in any kind of risk situation, whether it's a pandemic or an internal risk or some other kind of external risk. And the third thing in the framework are guidelines, and guidelines are statements that help guide risk communicators as they make communication decisions down the line. So guidelines are extremely important in that three part of the framework. Today, we're not going to look at the framework per se. Is the step you go through in developing your messages for return to work communication. And so the documents that we'll look at are based on that. I know you're going to be wondering where you can get this information. There are two versions of it. There's a longer version which has the framework and the handbook, which is the guide to developing the communications. And there's a shorter version which you can get at the Health Canada website. So the question you might is, how can such a framework help you design effective risk messaging? So what you see now are the 7 stages that are a part of that process. And we're going to focus on that process today. The first is to look at the opportunity. And as we know, the opportunity now that most of us are facing is the return to work opportunity. How are we going to design effective messages in order to keep our employees safe, keep our clients safe, and build that kind of trust? So then the second step is to characterize the situation, to look at what the factors are in the situation that you can then use to build your messaging systems. The third step is to look at how your stakeholders, which in this case is often your employees, how they perceive the risks, the benefits, and the trade-offs. So these are the risk, benefits, and trade-offs are the elements that are going to affect the decisions that they make when they're standing in front of the cash register and deciding whether to let their nose poke out above their mask or keep their nose inside their mask. And so you need to know what's going to determine their thinking. So then you assess that and look at their options. Their options are going to be wear the mask or not wear the mask, to get close to allow this person to be closer, or to keep that person at arm's length, to identify what kinds of hygiene needs to be followed in a particular situation. So those are the options that they have. And you want to be able to influence their assessment of those options. And so you need to know how they perceive those options, whether they see them as risky and dangerous, or whether they see them as within bounds for effective safety. Then you develop and pre-test your strategies, your risk communication plans, and your messaging. So you say our strategy, which is often a statement of a theme. Our strategy is going to be, let's say, to be as safe as possible. Or our strategy is going to be to allow our clients to let's say it's a gym, to allow our clients to sweat as much as they want, but still stay safe. And so setting up that strategy. Then you implement the risk communication plans. That's designing the messages and preparing the messages and delivering those messages to people. And then finally evaluating the risk communication effectiveness, which is that ongoing monitoring of how things are working in order to adjust kind of on the fly. So let's look at stage 1, defining the opportunity. The return to work communication opportunity is the one that most of us are going to focus on, the one that we're focusing on in this talk. So you do 3 things. First, you identify the goals and the processes that you're going to follow in developing your messages. And those 7 steps can be useful there. And then you set up a communication team. Now that communication team needs to be people in your organization who are involved in that contact with your employees. And usually it's a special communication team that you can go to options and to relate to in the preparing of your messages. And then you create an opportunity statement, and that statement sort of lays out the elements that are of the team, the risk communication team for such and such an agency, let's say, is to design messaging, or to keep our clients safe, or to handle the messaging to staff, and for what purpose? In order to protect our clients, in order to protect our employees, in order to build trust, in order to turn our situation around, as we saw in our example, to make it a learning experience for people. And we'll do this how? We'll do this through our messaging, we'll do it through our meetings, we'll do it through other kinds of contact that we have with our employees. And then usually there's kind of an end date for it. This is an example of the opportunity statement that you'll find in, this is in the Health Canada framework. And this is a opportunity statement for risk communication that was done for pandemic awareness back in 2005. But it's still useful as a kind of a model to give you some idea of how you can write that statement out, which is your guiding principle as you move through your return to risk communication. So opportunity for a pandemic influenza committee, so they gave their committee a name, communication subcommittees, to ensure that Canadians are prepared to take appropriate action if we experience a pandemic, in a way that builds Canadians' confidence in our organizations. So there's a goal there and a benefit as well as a risk. And then some mechanisms are listed there, how they're going to do it, right? We're going to have a strong communication network. So they're going to bring all the people into the network that they can. They're going to have identify who's going to communicate what in the phases of the pandemic. Now, this is looking at back then. There was no pandemic, but there is one now. So they're developing different options, so strategies and methods and tools to use at each stage. So that could be media messaging. It could be or that risk information, and then they're going to design their key messages, and they have a date for when they're going to get it done. So some kind of opportunity statement like that will form in your mind. Write it down. It's a good idea to have that handy. So then characterizing the situation is the second stage, and your team here will want to look for available knowledge and then develop some hypothesis of how your stakeholders, or how your clients and your transmission through handling of materials, or transmission through the air. And then you prepare your initial framing. So your initial framing of the particular hazard, in this case, coming back to work during a second wave of the pandemic, or if you've already done return to work communications, bringing on new people into your workplace, or expanding your workplace from one area to another area. One way to look at that framing is to use the what, so what, and now what message framing device, and that is what the issue is. So what's the hazard? The hazard is aerosol transmission. The hazard is transmission from materials. The hazard is having a cohort that's too large and you become a super spreader event. So what does this mean to us? What is our risk? So those risks can be that the infection gets a foothold in your agency, and then what actions or behaviors can your employees take to that. And over here on the right, I've got a relaunch guidance document from Alberta Public Health, and this page is your expert information. There's also going to be in the chat, and I believe Victoria is going to put it into the chat, a list of websites from the World Health Organization all the way down to a community bulletin board of risk communication information. That is World Health Organization, Canada and Canada Health, Alberta and Alberta Health, Edmonton Municipal Health, and then even more local community organizations, and a list of sites there that you can go to build that expertise knowledge that you want to have behind your messaging. So let's look at how you take that information that you get from these sources, and there's another one over there on the right-hand side. So you want to try to get as much of that evidence as possible and let that be the basis for your risk messaging. You can use these three. First, influence diagrams are like, if you do this, then this will happen. Okay, it'll cause and effect. Ways of looking at it are kind of the same, but what are the various causes for a particular effect? And if you want that effect to be the flattening of the curve, what do we have to do? We have to quarantine, we have to manage groups, we have to protect our faces, we have to not touch our faces and do these things that lead to that. So what are the causes of the effect that we want to have? And we're all familiar with that diagram there. And you can use that diagram because your employees will be looking at that diagram too. And then inventorying related factors. Factors and outcomes are important ways to look at any kind of phenomenon, really. But you can look at those and use those as a basis for your messaging. So you wear your mask, you wash your hands, you stay away from other people. What does that lead to? It leads to employee safety. And so that's the expert knowledge that you want to have behind it. And so your messages will have more trust weight and trust value if you follow these kinds of messages. All right, so you want to assess your stakeholders, and in doing that, you look at what they know, what they don't know that's consequential, how might they misunderstand your messaging, what they might want to know, who do they trust, and what communication methods do they prefer. So that kind of an assessment, if you're going to have a strategic plan for your return to work communications, is crucial. Okay, and it's also crucial to understand what your stakeholder groups are. And those 4 stakeholder groups are indicated in that box on the right-hand side there. The people that you want to reach at the point of sale terminal are your transactors, and they're the ones who are going to test positive. They're the ones who are going to be on the what you call the front lines of facing the hazard that is confronted by your organization. You also have active interests, people who have a stake but aren't directly involved. Those are people like family, or they're people's children, or people that they ride on the bus with. But they're not the ones that you want to communicate with directly. And then you have audiences, and these are people who will be watching your risk communication, but they're not the ones that are affected by it. And so maintaining these differences between your audiences as a risk communicator is really important, because you can develop messages for each group. And the way communication is planned, it's usually group, and then message. And you have some messages for this group your decision makers, and that's like your other team.
Hey, Tom, you just froze there.
I froze?
Oh, now you're back. Yep. Now you're
Oh,
back.
okay, good. Right. Well, in this weather, you never know. It's kind of chilly outside. I might have. So, but could you hear me?
It did pause for a minute there. I missed the last sentence or so.
Okay. Okay. The way communication is planned is often with audience, 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 and these are your stakeholder groups, decision makers, transactors, active interests, and audiences, and then what your messaging is for each of those groups. So messaging for decision makers, messaging for transactors and active interests, and so on. So it's important to do that. So your initial message framing then, and I've got kind of an example up here for you. You have your objective, the theme, you know, and it doesn't have to be that theme, but it could be some other, but this is a common one. Safety and service can work together. Wellness and performance can work together. We can be safe even though even in the face of clients who are resistant to such a thing. Your key message, threat, is in the second wave, and there are actions that we must take. So you can just identify that as a key message. There was a key message that was used and that we saw in our video in watching the Colgate University president, that their message was, we can work through this together. And then your evidence, which comes from the expertise that you've consulted. This would be Alberta Public Health and other sources. Protective equipment can prevent you from infecting others, and infections are rising in our area, which is in fact true today in October in Alberta. What challenges? Okay, the challenges come from your assessment of the and what you know about your stakeholders at this point. The threat's invisible, so they're not going to be able to see it. They're going to think of themselves as invulnerable, especially if they're younger. They're going to think that if a person is not showing any symptoms, that they're okay. So these are the challenges that you have to overcome in your messaging. And then personal action that people can take. What can people do in order to protect themselves? They can use their masks, they can maintain distance, they can keep their hands clean, and they can encourage other people. And so in the planning process for your communications, you follow these. The next stage is to assess stakeholder perceptions of the risks, and here you use your understanding of your employees to shape your messages. So how might they see it? And there's an example down there of some ways that people could see the threat. If they, let's say that third one, this is no big deal, we can handle this, we don't have a lot of COVID around here or something like that, then your message might be something like, it's bigger than you thought, wear your mask. And so there the message is tailored to that particular perception. People have different values, okay? So they may be worried about their job security, they may be worried about their family or their vanity. They don't want to wear a mask because they can't show their nice teeth. So a message that accommodates that, okay? Our kids depend on us, wear your mask. And so that's a way that you can assess their perceptions of it and build that into your messaging. So how do we find out how stakeholders think? You build a model of their thinking, and the Health Canada framework and process shows us how to build that model. So what do they know that's correct? Like if they have information from their sources, how can you affirm that? What do they know that makes a difference? So you can remind them or warn them that that if they don't know something, they can that can be a danger to them. What might they misunderstand? So if you have good expert knowledge, you can correct that. What do they know that would what do they want to know? So you can acknowledge that they want to know whether it's safe. They want to know whether it's dangerous. Who do they trust? So you want to make sure that you give messaging responsibilities to their immediate supervisors if you can. And what methods do they prefer? So many of them like to get their messaging on their phones or on their computers, or like to see it on the wall. And so how can you then use that mental model to develop your messages? So you build your expert model by looking at your health service expertise and the guidelines that are provided by the Minister of Health. You look at your stakeholder model, and then you identify what their options are, and you target your messaging on those options. So for example, if the expert model says that masks protect mostly them from me, okay, so if I'm infectious, I'm really protecting them. But if your stakeholders see it differently, mask protects me from them, I'm wearing a mask so that they don't infect me, what's your messaging going to be? Well, your messaging is going to be to wear the mask or not. So that's an option that they're going to have. You want to encourage them to engage in protective behavior. And so helping them understand that can be a way of designing your messages. So how can you do that in design messages in order to get them to make the right decisions? Okay, so you have to understand how they weigh the risks. So if they're looking at the risk of wearing their mask under their chin, then you need to develop your communications based on that. And so you have various ways of identifying, and I'm not going to go into them in this brief time, but there are various tools that you can use to engage with your employees at this time and find out what they're thinking. So as an example here, the option is distance, so they may think that arm's length is okay, and so you emphasize 3 meters. And so it's that gap in message content over there on the right-hand side. That's where you are going to get the most bang for your buck in designing messages that meet their information needs. Stage 5 in the process, you develop the messages and you plan your communications, and you identify and you actually produce and deliver those messages. So here's an example of how you can do that. Your insights from your expert knowledge, strategies that you identify. You have a plan. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to introduce it. We're going to set up the workplace and have these plastic screens. We're going to have floor stickers and signage and that kind of thing. So you plan all that, and then your messaging. Together we can take steps to follow AHS guidelines to protect ourselves and our clients. That's a typical message that would derive from this based on the themes that you would identify for your workplace. Okay, so this strategic approach that I'm advocating here is not one of trying to find the way to do the best message, but it's a way to do the necessary homework that's involved that can help your organization achieve the outcomes that you want to achieve, as we saw in our example of Colgate University. So then the implementation of those plans, you produce the materials, train your team members, and identify a process for doing that, and then implement the plan and modify it as you go along. And you do that by evaluating how things are going. And this, I've got a little example of what worked, what didn't work, and what's interesting that we could follow up on. You've probably used a lot of different kind of evaluation, things like this, but go get that team, bring that team back, sit them down and say, okay, how did it work? We're following what is available from Alberta Health Services. We know that our employees are going to have these tendencies to not social distance, to not wear their masks, or not clean their masks, or not replace their masks, or not wash their hands. And we prepared messaging that's going to allow us to do that. How did it work? And just go back over that in your team and make sure that everybody has a say in that, and then say, okay, well, maybe that message isn't working for us anymore. Let's shift that around a little bit, because I've been seeing people letting their nose poke out the top of their mask. And we really don't want to do that. And also now we're in the second wave, so we need to go back to our original messaging. And so that can be something that's important to evaluate along the way. So then to recap, those 7 steps, you kind of follow them and adapt them to your particular organization. There's a better chance that your messaging is going to be effective, it's going to build trust, going to balance the risks and opportunities and benefits of this particular kind of engagement activity that you're getting into. It's a major intervention into your employees' work. Okay, you want that intervention to be planned and strategic and not to be off the cuff. So what we've looked at in our talk today is that effective communication can help people make the right and safe decisions in the workplace. It's an organizational effort if you want it to be strategic and have every chance of succeeding, so that the communication itself is what makes the difference. And it was the communication itself that made the difference at Colgate University, as we saw. So you want to balance the benefits of the cost. If you're going to engage with your employees, make it something that works for your organization and that shows your values of those employees. And then you have a 7-step process that you can follow so that this intervention campaign, which we call risk communication for return to work, this intervention campaign can make a real difference and help you to target messaging and make your messaging more effective. That's the way communicators do things. So is there an easy way to target your messaging? Now, some of you may be thinking, let's just get to that. Let's just get to that golden rule. And here comes the golden rule. The golden rule of effective risk communication is as follows. It's based on the fact that there are 2 kinds of people when they're confronted with a risk. Okay, one you call a risk-prone person. Think of a younger person. Think of a person who's careless and sometimes takes a chance, maybe even enjoys a chance. Okay, those are called risk-prone people. Okay, my wife, for example, sees me as a risk-prone person. I don't know. I'm not as risk-averse as she is. She takes a different approach to risks, not to welcome them or not to engage in them. And so these 2 types of people have been identified in the research as, people who, it's a good way to categorize your employees. You look at any employee standing in front of the point of sale terminal, you can say, probably that's a risk-prone person. That person is going to follow the rules. That person is risk-averse. He or she is going to be dropping that mask down anytime. Okay, so then you look at the types of messaging that are common. Okay, and you have 2 different kinds of messages. You have a positive message, which is the message of if you do this, these good things will happen. That's called a positive message, or it's called a gain-framed message. It's framed in terms of the gain that can be accomplished by following the rule. Okay. Then there's also negative message, or what's called a loss-framed message. Okay. So what bad can happen? So instead of telling my son, you study to be a good driver and you'll be able to drive this wonderful car, I might show him some pictures of of accidents that kids have gotten into. And that negative messaging often works with risk-prone people. And teenagers, let's face it, they tend to be more risk-prone than us responsible adults. And so here's your golden rule, okay? And this works all the time, and I hope that you're able to apply it. Use positive messaging for risk-averse stakeholders and negative messages for risk-prone stakeholders. Okay, so what does that look like? A positive message would be model good behavior, good employee behavior by wearing your mask. Okay, your risk-averse employee is going to respond to that. I want to model good employee behavior and I will wear my mask, and they'll never drop it down under their nose. But then let's say you've got someone who you catch them doing that all the time, then a negative message for that risk-prone person would be something like wearing your mask under your chin can expose you to icky viruses. That negative message, I don't know why. Research has shown that negative message tends to have an effect on your risk-prone individuals. So there you go. There's the effective risk communication golden rule, and I hope it works for you. I want to say thank you as we reach the end of our talk to you all for coming. Good luck in your return to work communications. I want to thank Victoria for giving me this opportunity. I want to thank Jasmine Kellogg, Director of Communication at Colgate University, for sharing her materials with us. She and I are working on a scholarly project based around the work that was done at Colgate University. And I want to thank the communication workers at Health Canada for developing such a great framework for building strategic communications that we can apply no matter how large your organization is, and no matter when an opportunity like this raises its head. So thank you very much to you all. And I think that comes to our end.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tom. I think that was really great information, and I loved how the 7-step framework that you laid out is nice and strategic. It's always really important, right, to understand people's perceptions before we can, come up with a good communication plan. And it is so important right now in our times of where there's a lot of anxiety going on and uncertainty. People just really need to have really good, solid communication to help support them, to help them feel safe, and to really be able to thrive. So I think this is really valuable. So thank you, everybody who was able to attend. This session was recorded, so we will be sharing the recording later on for those of you who are here and maybe didn't catch all of it, and or those who weren't able to attend. We do have a lot of different new webinars as well coming up next month. And so I'm not going to go through them all because I think we've got quite a few, but we will send a link following this so that you have access to those. And we wish you all the best with Healthy Workplace Month as well. And we will chat with you all soon. So thank you again, everybody, for attending.